our white plum lineage. Her teacher, as Michael said, was his father Robert Kennedy Roshi, and he's a Jesuit priest who studied with Yamada Roshi, Maizumi Roshi, and Bernie Glassman Roshi, and he received transmission in Inca from Bernie Glassman Roshi. And I believe, Ellen, you're one of his 17 successors, I believe. So he's been quite prolific as a Zen teacher and a Jesuit priest. And I just want to say that this branch really enriches our white plum lineage enormously. And so I'm very happy and grateful, Ellen, that you're here this morning to share with us, and also happy that all of you in the Sangha get to hear some of the richness of our lineage through Ellen Roshi. Well, thank you, Ellen, for being here.
Thank you, Robert, for inviting me. And I want to mention, related to what you just said, that I do see this as one of the major contributions of Bernie Glassman, who's well known for engaged Buddhism and the many other contributions that he made. But opening up Zen to people from other spiritual traditions was one of his main missions in life, one of his main calls in life. And so I feel compelled to carry on this aspect of his vision. So shall I get started then today, talking about Zen in an age of interspiritual practice? I chose this word, interspiritual practice, because it focuses on experience and it focuses on practice, not just dogma or doctrine or theological discussion or reading or talking, but actual practice and actual experience. Wayne Teasdale, Brother Wayne Teasdale, wrote a book back in 1999 called The Mystic Heart. And in this, he coined this term, interspiritual. And I like this term, as I said, because his definition is sharing ultimate experiences across traditions. So Zen, although it can be a relaxation technique, it can be a mindfulness strategy, it can help people deal with their psychological problems, I think that Zen is concerned with ultimate experiences. It's a spiritual path. And so interspiritual practice is the sharing of ultimate experiences across traditions. I think this is a really important topic in our multicultural society. In these days, there's widespread interaction among people of different cultures and religious traditions on the internet, and when we're not in a pandemic, through global travel. So this is an exciting age when we have access to all the wisdom from all the different spiritual traditions in the world. And this wasn't the case in the past. People were in silos. People were more isolated from people of other cultures and traditions. And even in my own past, we didn't get to travel, or we didn't have the internet during the first decades of my life. So this is an exciting time to be alive. And as the world has come together in this way, many people are born interspiritual. They're born into more than one religious tradition. Many have a mother of one tradition and a father of another tradition. In addition, many people marry people of another tradition. So you have a new family starting out, working to integrate different traditions from both sides of the family. And then some people start out, they're born into one religious tradition or spiritual tradition, and then later in life, they find another that particularly calls out to them, that speaks to their heart. And so they find another tradition later in life that's meaningful to them. So in my book, I'll show it here, see if I can get it close enough. Embracing the Inconceivable, Interspiritual Practice of Zen and Christianity. As the title says this book focuses on Zen and Christianity, but it really applies because I was born into a Christian tradition and have subsequently studied Zen in depth. So these are the two traditions that I know about most deeply. But I think the book also can speak to people from other traditions. I had to laugh at Bernie Glassman's memorial service. Joan Halifax made a joke. She said, Bernie Glassman was 100% Jewish and the rest Buddhist. And I think that's true. And there are many Zen teachers in the country who are both Jewish and practicing Zen Buddhism. And there's many other Zen teachers and Zen practitioners I know who have combined Zen with other spiritual traditions. For example, some Zen teachers and practitioners are interested in Native American cultures and traditions or indigenous cultures and traditions, and they've combined Zen with their own or a later discovered interest in Native American or indigenous traditions. Some Zen teachers and practitioners have combined Zen with yoga and various branches of Hindu traditions. So interspiritual practice can take many different forms. And I think one of the most common forms it takes is combining Zen, Buddhism, with other branches of Buddhism. Theravada and Vajrayana and Mahayana branches all being intertwined in this country. So many forms of interspiritual practice. Coming of age in the 60s, many of us read a book called Black Elk Speaks. And in this book, Oglala Lakota medicine man, Black Elk, shared wisdom from his tradition. And I recently read a biography written more recently about Black Elk, and the title of that is Nicholas Black Elk. Back in the day, we didn't know about the Nicholas part. They were emphasizing the Oglala Lakota medicine man part. But for many, many decades of his life, Nicholas Black Elk was a Catholic catechist. And in fact, at this time, he's being considered for sainthood in the Catholic Church. There's a process that you go through for canonization for sainthood, and Black Elk is being considered. Nicholas Black Elk often said that when his people came in contact with other Native American tribes, they would simply add on some of the ceremonies and practices from a tribe they came in contact with. When Native American people heard about Christianity, many of them liked many of the ideas they heard in Christianity, and they wanted to just add them on to what they already had in their own traditions. Unfortunately, the missionaries had a different idea about this, but I think it's important to look at this idea of adding more than one tradition, feeling free to do this. And I think Nicholas Black Elk was a pioneer in interspiritual practice. Well, there's a wonderful Zen story about the coming together of various cultures and religious traditions in John Woo's book, The Golden Age of Zen. One day, wearing a Buddhist cassock, Taoist cap, and Confucian shoes, Shan Hui came into the imperial court. And the emperor was amused by his motley attire. And he asked him, "Are you a Buddhist monk?" And Shan Hui pointed to his hat. He said, "Are you then a Taoist priest?" And he pointed to his shoes. And he said, "Well, so then are you a man of the world?" And he pointed to his Buddhist cassock. And on this occasion, Shan Hui wrote a verse: "With a Taoist cap, a Buddhist cassock, and a pair of Confucian shoes, I I harmonize 3 great houses into one big family. So you can see that interspiritual practice is not new. It's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. The various spiritual traditions and cultures of the world have been interacting and mixing. And so my main message of the day is to don't allow yourself to be categorized and put in a box. There is no pressure. One should feel no pressure to choose just one spiritual tradition. During the early years of Charles and my marriage, we lived out in Kaibito, Arizona on the Navajo reservation, where Charles was a teacher at Kaibito Primary School. And on weekends, various friends from the school would invite us to their families' hogans or over to Hopi villages on the nearby Hopi reservation to Navajo sings out in the desert, or to ceremonies that were taking and dances that were taking place on the Hopi reservation. And it was a wonderful time of learning how do you combine more than one spiritual tradition. And the Navajos had a slogan at one of their parades, and it was the best of both. How do we take and integrate the best of both? In their case, Navajo culture and Anglo culture that was becoming more dominant. So often we got invited to Hope Villa, and there was a Hopi elder named David Monangi, and he would invite us into the kiva, and we would attend various Hopi ceremonies. We were enthralled with it. And then after the ceremonies and after the dances, he would invite us back to his house. And we'd sit on the dirt floor there and eat blue piki bread prepared by his wife, Nora. And we'd listen to David's stories. And it was a wonderful time. And then after a while, David said to us, he said, I'm really pleased, and I think it's wonderful that you're interested in Hopi culture and you appreciate Hopi culture, but you weren't born Hopi. So what you need to do is go back to your own culture and go very deep into it and bring forth what's good there to benefit humanity and the earth. And so that's what we did. So subsequently, one day when Charles was studying at St. Bernard's Seminary in Rochester, New York, to become a deacon in the Catholic Church, he saw a little flyer, a little one-page fold-over flyer on the bulletin board, and it was advertising interfaith retreats that Bernie Glassman and Roshi, Robert Kennedy, and Rabbi Don Singer were giving in the early 80s. This was about 1982 and 1984 down in New York at the Zen community of New York. And so we went there, and that's how we met our future Zen teacher, Roshi Robert Kennedy, who wasn't a Zen teacher at that time. So my book focuses on combining Zen and Christianity because it's hard to go deep enough into more than one tradition. And interspiritual practice, depth is of essence. It's not about a little of this and a little of that. It's about going really deeply into more than one tradition and being enriched by them. And this involves meditation and prayer and practicing with spiritual communities and studying with a teacher. It's not just talk and a little of this and a little of that. So now I'd like to turn our attention toward how two very different traditions can expand and enrich one another. I find Zen and Christianity to be mutually enriching, And Zen has expanded and enriched my understanding of Christianity, and Christianity has enriched my experience and understanding of Zen. I want to emphasize that both of these traditions are complete and profound all on their own, but combining them, I find them complementary and deeply enrich and deepen one another. And some of us need all the help we can get. So I encourage you to explore what you have an affinity or a call toward. Well, Yamada Roshi, in addition to Bernie Glassman being a great visionary in terms of interspiritual practice of Zen and other traditions, another person key in this regard was Yamada Roshi of Kamakura, Japan. And Yamada Roshi once said, if a point of contact between Zen and Christianity could be discovered, it would be an epic-making event in the history of human civilization. For the future cultural progress of the human race and for the realization of world peace, it would indeed be an important turning point. And I'd like to share a few more words of Yamada Roshi that I think are important related to this topic, and that is, Yamada said, my work with Christian students, however, is to guide these people in Zen practice and to bring them to the Satori experience. Questions of how this experience is to be understood from the standpoint of Christianity and what significance it has from a Christian standpoint are for Christians themselves to answer. My only wish is that both Christianity and Buddhism regain their power to bring their followers to spiritual salvation or spiritual liberation, we might say. So as a Christian from birth and a Zen practitioner for many, many decades, this book is my attempt to answer the call that Yamada Roshi put out there. Well, there's a famous poem by the Zen poet Ikkyu, and it goes like this. Many paths lead up the mountain, but at the peak, we all gaze at a single bright moon. And I think this is an interesting poem with regards to interspiritual practice because as we all know, we have exposure these days to many paths up the mountain. And these paths are not the same. If we go up the mountain from the east, it may be a lovely gradual stroll through woodlands and through meadows, and eventually we reach the peak. On another, maybe on the west side of the mountain, it may be jagged and rocky and involves climbing over rocks and scaling tall cliffs until we get to the peak. So the paths will look very different depending on the different path up the mountain that you happen to take. And then, even when we get to the top, the single bright moon will look different to different people, depending on the weather conditions that day and other conditions. The bright moon looks different at different times to different people from different perspectives and angles. So I like this moon, this poem. And I think it's important to understand that the bright moon is inexhaustible. It can be seen and can enrich our lives in many, many different ways. Zen teaches us to embrace both sameness and difference. And in interspiritual practice, it's important to realize that we're enriched by both the similarities and the differences between the different traditions. There's no need to argue about which path is right or wrong, or the best one, or the only one. Each person will find a path that works for him or her, depending on their own circumstances and temperament and affinity. So we don't need to worry about which one's better or best or the only. Looking at Zen as one possible path people might choose, I chose Zen because it's a path leading to the experience of non-duality. Seeing through the illusion of a separate self and directly experiencing ultimate reality manifesting as you and everything else in the universe, so that you're able to live from this perspective, from this experience, direct experience of oneness, and reach out to others and to the earth with compassion. So I think Zen is a path of the direct experience of non-duality, oneness, and it leads to a life of wisdom and compassion. Zen is a path of meditation. Christianity is a path of love, experiencing God's boundless love for me and for you and for every person. And with this direct experience of God's boundless love, you realize your own capacity to love others. And the Christian path as a path of love liberates us by love. So we have Zen as a path of meditation, Christianity as a path of love. My great aunt, Anna Howard Shaw, was the first woman to be ordained in the United States as a Methodist Protestant minister. And her favorite word for God was the infinite. I like that, the infinite. And she worked as a Christian minister and as a physician, taking care of poor residents of Boston back in the early 1900s, late 1800s. And she also was an orator. Her main call in life was to be an orator for the women's suffrage movement, and she was a protege of Susan B. Anthony. Anyway, I'm going to share just one quote from Aunt Anna. She said, and I think this is particularly important during this time of division and violence in our country. She says, reformers must be bathed in and led by a great love for humanity, a love that nothing can quench, which can endure all things and still trust with such an abiding faith that it saves, if not others, at least yourself. So this path of love is important, and particularly important as we engage in social action, because social action must always be rooted in love. And in Zen terms, we might say rooted in oneness, rooted in compassion. Well, there's a verse that appears in the Den-Kuroku twice. They have this verse twice in the Den-Kuroku, and none of the other verses are there twice. So I take this to mean that it's a really important thing to listen up and pay attention. Zen master Dongshan Liangji was crossing a stream, and he saw his face reflected there in the water, and he was suddenly awakened, and he exclaimed in verse, "Avoid seeking him in someone else, or you will be far apart from the self. Solitary now am I and independent, but I meet him everywhere. He now surely is me, but I am not him. Understanding it in this way, you will be directly one with thusness." In Dongshan's words, "He surely is me," he expresses the realization that I am a manifestation of ultimate reality or God. However, when he says, "but I am not him," he is emphasizing that God is greater than me and greater than any one of us and greater than all of us put together and all of us in the whole creation. The whole, God is greater than any of us and the whole creation and the whole universe. The last two lines of this verse express the Zen teaching of non-duality. Understanding it in this way, you will be directly one with thusness. The Zen experience of non-duality brings to the fore the non-dual teachings of Jesus that had escaped me in my Christian life up until Zen insight into non-duality, Zen experience of non-duality. And for example, Jesus said, the Father and I are one. This is an expression of non-duality, and it's not just true for Jesus, it's true for each of us. Other non-dual teachings of Jesus are, whoever has seen me has seen the Father. Or, just as you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me. When Jesus holds up the bread at the Last Supper and says, this is my body, we understand, because the experience of non-duality allows us to feel for ourselves that our body does not end with our skin. It extends to the ends of the universe. This is my body. So it can be in any small item, like a small piece of bread or a sip of wine, but it's also the whole universe is my body. So there's a Christian teaching dating all the way back to the Council of Chalcedon, that which was in 451, that has been helpful to me from the Christian tradition to understand some of the Zen teachings. And that is the teaching about Jesus and God are distinct but not separate. They were trying to make a statement about Jesus and God, and they are distinct but not separate. So that in Christianity, we hear about the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and there aren't three gods in Christianity. There's one God, but the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are distinct but not separate. Now we hear a similar teaching in Zen. In the Song of the Jeweled Mirrored Samadhi, it says, filling a silver bowl with snow, hiding a heron in moonlight. When you array them, they're not the same. When you mix them, you know where they are. So this is another teaching of non-duality, the one and the many. Though we're one, we're each distinct manifestations of that one great reality. So this Christian teaching of distinct but not separate helped me understand and express this reality more clearly. Which leads me to the Zen teaching about no self, which means there's no separate lasting thing called a self. You are not a thing, and fundamentally not one thing exists. But at the same time, we are distinct. We're distinct, but not separate from ultimate reality or God. We're already one with God. We're already not separate, but Zen practice allows us to wake up to this reality, to open our hearts and minds to it, that we're one, and yet we're distinct. We're not a drop that merges back into the ocean at this time, nor at any time in the future. So this is an important teaching to understand it. It's also important because some people misunderstand this teaching of no self. And actually it's important to appreciate yourself as a distinct person with gifts, and your gifts are unique and unlike anyone else's gifts, and we need to develop those gifts if humanity and the earth are to survive. So it's important to develop and share your individual gifts. So Zen uses terms for ultimate reality like emptiness, or the absolute, the formless, the unborn, thusness, suchness, and sometimes simply it. I think that's probably most common, just it, when it's referring to ultimate reality. And all of these terms tend to be impersonal. Now, occasionally, Zen uses more personal language. Like sometimes it'll talk about him, like in the verse I just read from the Den Kuroku. Sometimes it says the old fellow, or someone, or one. So sometimes Zen uses more personal language, but mostly it uses more impersonal language. Christianity, on the other hand, tends to use more personal language like Father and God, but it also sometimes uses impersonal language, like Anna liked the word the infinite instead of using the term God. So both use both, but Zen certainly is strong on the impersonal side, and Christianity tends to be much stronger on the personal side. And there's an excellent discussion in Ken Wilber's 2017 book, The Religions of Tomorrow. He talks about the experience of ultimate reality that is had through Zen practice that is first person, I. Like in Buddha's words, when he first awakened, I, the great earth and all beings simultaneously achieved the way. And in this expression, the I means ultimate reality. Sometimes in Zen, we talk about it. As I just said, often the word for God or ultimate reality is it. And it from the Zen experience is the whole universe. I'm one with the whole universe. The great functioning, the great reality. So sometimes we speak about it as it. But Wilber points out that there's value in using the more personal language as well. And that would be language that's you, or thou, or we have a personal relationship. So this is a different language. And I think that the personal language is important, like in the verse I just shared with you, he surely is me, I am not him. It emphasizes that there is one greater than this small ego self. There is one greater than the whole universe combined, one greater than you could possibly imagine. And that's why I titled my book, The Inconceivable. We can't grasp this with the intellect, as Zen teaches all the time, and Christianity teaches this as well. So Ken Wilber says, I want to just share a little quote directly from Ken's discussion of this. To realize that you can approach that great intelligence and directly resonate with it is a profound spiritual experience. Further, a path of devotional surrender to this intelligence, or simple awe and wonder at this infinite mystery, gets at self-sense in a way that other approaches just can't. You can't take up a third view. You can take up a third view person of spirit as the great web of life and still retain your ego. Likewise, you can imagine a first person view of spirit as your own true self, but that allows self in any form, including the small egoic self, to remain stuck in the picture somewhere. So the more personal approach to ultimate reality or God, I say, puts the ego in its proper perspective of the relationship to ultimate reality. This insight liberates you from domination by the ego. And I do want to say that the ego is not the enemy. It's what allows you to function in the world, but it's also not the whole picture and doesn't need to be center stage all the time. So this more personal approach to God or ultimate reality is also encountered in Zen. For example, in case 45, in the Muman Khan, Patriarch N of Tozan said, even Shakyamuni and Maitreya are servants of that one. Tell me, who is that one? So in this language, we hear that even the Buddhas of the past and Buddhas of the future are servants of that one. And so this is the more personal language, that one. But he says, who? He doesn't say, what is that one? He says, who is that one? Just tell me. So this koan moves us from the experience of oneness to the experience of the one who is greater than we are, greater than all of creation, distinct but not separate. Okay, so some people may prefer the more impersonal language, but I'm just wanting to emphasize that there are some benefits to the more personal language as well, and that Zen is not just a secular form of mindfulness or ethics. It's a spiritual path that leads straight up the mountain to the experience of ultimate reality. And Jesuit theologian Roger Haight defines spirituality as the way people lead their lives in the face of what is of ultimate concern, in the face of ultimacy or transcendence, and however that might be conceived by the individual. However, he also points out that in Christianity, God is absolute mystery. Absolute mystery. And we hear about this in Zen as well. In Zen, it's not knowing. Not knowing is most intimate. So it can be absolute mystery also. So another example of the more personal language in the Zen tradition is Yun Yen and Pai Chang's conversation one day. One day, Yun Yen asked the great Zen master Pai Chang, every day there's hard work to do. Who do you do it all for? And Pai Chang said, there is someone who requires it. Yun Yen said, why not have him do it for himself? And Pai Chang said, he has no tools. This is a powerful koan that helps us to see that we are Buddha's hands in the world. We are Christ's hands in the world. And this koan empowers us it compels us to do the work that needs to be done in this world, to act accordingly to this insight. Well, I'd like to summarize here some of the things I've been saying. Oh, can the host let me share my screen or not? It's saying host disabled participant screen share.
Okay, I think you should be able to do it now.
Okay, good. Yep. Okay, what I have here is I've summarized what I see as some of the fruits and the pitfalls of interspiritual practice. And I think the most important fruit of interspiritual practice is human liberation, that people are liberated to practice as they wish and not feel pressured to choose just one spiritual tradition. And this is particularly important when people are born into more than one tradition and live in a society where they're surrounded by multiple traditions, which can be expanding, enriching, and enlightening. The third item on this list is personal integration of your religion of birth with another tradition. Why this is important, I think, is it's like a person being bilingual. They're fluent in more than one spiritual tradition because they grew up in a family with more than one spiritual tradition. And people who are bilingual know that the mother tongue is deeply intimate and allows aspects of their personality to come forth that their second language may not. So it should be cherished It's an authentic part of an individual. And so we need to be able to help people integrate multiple spiritual traditions, particularly if they were born into them. Interspiritual practice is inclusive. We're living in an age of inclusivity, and it's important to build bridges among various spiritual traditions. And these bridges are built through direct experience and practice rather than intellectual discourse. The next item, I'm going to just try to figure out how to get this to go down. Here we go. We need to be able to draw on all of the wisdom traditions of the world because we face such immense problems, and we will, by uniting with others and drawing on the wisdom of all the spiritual traditions, we're more likely to be able to solve the immense problems facing us today. And to work together for the common good, we need to use all our resources, including our spiritual resources. Now, Zen practice in particular, there are other non-dual traditions, but I think when a person practices in a non-dual tradition, it allows them to see the non-dual teaching more clearly of other traditions that don't emphasize that perspective as much. And then there are pitfalls. And one pitfall, I think the biggest pitfall and the most common pitfall, is not going deeply into the traditions. It takes time and practice and mentors and spiritual community participation to go deeply, to immerse yourself in another tradition. And it's not just a matter of reading widely or talking widely with other people. It's a matter of immersion and actual practice. Another potential pitfall is focusing only on similarities and not appreciating the differences, because the richness comes through in the differences, the contrast. Another potential pitfall is confusion and lack of clarity. I think one of the reasons people become confused is they don't cite the source, they don't cite the sources of what they're combining. And then it becomes confusing, I think, for people. And then you're ignoring the context. What was the historical and cultural context of these different teachings? So it's important to acknowledge where different things are coming from. Is this a Tibetan chant, or is this a Zen chant? Is this a Christian prayer, or is this a Jewish prayer? It helps to know the context where this is coming from. One thing that sometimes occurs with interspiritual practice is some individuals don't feel fully understood or fully accepted, or like they fully fit in or belong in either community because of this other really important aspect of their life that the one community or the other doesn't understand. And then the biggest difficulty is carving out enough time to practice in more than one tradition. As you know from your study of Zen, it takes a lot of time to do just one tradition. So doing more than one tradition is a major challenge. So I would like to stop here, and I got to get out of this now. I got to remember how to get out of it without losing the whole everything. Oh, I remember. There, I got it. I'm old, and I'm not bilingual, and I'm not fluent in technology, but I'm struggling, limping along here. Okay, you're back, and I wanted to spend the rest of our time together hearing your questions, comments, sharing about your experiences with interspiritual practice of Zen and whatever.
I'll start.
Okay.
That exceeded my very high expectations for your talk.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for recommending me in the book.
I'm interested, you mentioned practice at the end. I'm interested in how we've been talking in the interfaith circle about prayer and meditation and the intersection of that, how the actual practice day-to-day changes. I'd be interested to hear you talk a minute or two about how prayer and meditation are the same or different, how this affects your day-to-day practice, like from an act sort of way?
Yes, that's an important question. And I might say, Robert, that Parabola magazine is going to have an excerpt from the book. And I didn't know what chapter they chose. And then one of my ex-students' fathers sent me an email, and evidently he subscribes to it. And he told me that the chapter that they chose was prayer and meditation, or no, simple prayers. There's a whole section of the book devoted to prayer and meditation, and what Parabolas chose for their issue on wellness was simple prayers. So this is an important topic. Of course, Zazen, we might say, is a pure form of prayer. Wordless, silent, coming into the presence of that which is greater than anything we can imagine, without any intention, without any agenda, without any words or concepts or ideas. So Zazen itself is a major form of prayer, but it's not the only type of prayer. People can also use words effectively for prayer. And so you have your Buddhist services there at the Chicago Life and Meditation Center, or Meditation and Life Center. And Christians have prayer that they say verbally. So verbal prayer can be your own individual prayers throughout the day. They can be liturgies that you attend. And so all types of prayer can be very helpful. Sometimes silent wordless prayer, and sometimes silent prayer. And silent wordless or short prayers can be important in getting yourself through the day. I live here in Blacksburg, Virginia, in the Appalachian Mountains. And so I frequently just glance over at a mountain and say, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From whence does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Yes. Or I might also say, may the mind flower bloom in eternal spring, as I'm taking a walk on a beautiful spring day. So short prayers can come from either tradition, and they can be helpful in getting yourself through the day. So for many days, for the first few years of my nursing career, I worked as a neonatal intensive care nurse, and every time I entered the hospital, I prayed for God's healing on everyone in this great house of healing today. And I pray that you help me be a healing presence to each patient I care for. And I also pray, don't let me make any mistakes.
Wow.
So prayer can be really helpful and powerful, helping you get through the day. And then also I want to say that in the Gospels, Paul told the disciples and the Christians of the time, pray without ceasing. And I see that Zen practice helps us have the awareness and alertness and mindfulness to pray without ceasing, without words, just like we sit in Zazen without words. So I recommend praying however you're called to pray, your own words from scripture, however you want to pray. Did that answer your question, Robert?
Ellen,
Yes.
Mark here. Hi.
Hi, Mark.
First of all, thank you for that incredible talk.
Thank you.
I started to think about the Catholic worker Dorothy Day as I was listening to your talk. And I wonder whether you want to comment at all about what we are now calling engaged Buddhism, which is very much what Dorothy Day was doing, although she was a Catholic worker. And she saw the universal.
Right. And I would say that this is where Zen and Christianity come together most closely. We're Buddha's hands in the world, we're Christ's hands in the world, and this is where we meet face to face and hand to hand, working together to help the people and the earth. And so this is where these true traditions really intersect. And of course, I had the great pleasure a few years ago of going to Bernie Glass. It was a celebration that Bernie Glassman had, and it took place in Yonkers, and it took place at the Mary Noel. Well, anyway, part of it took place in Yonkers at the bakery, and we saw many people whose lives had been rebuilt by having a job and gaining employment skills in the bakery. And there was a woman there, and she thanked Bernie because she'd worked at the daycare center and she'd been able to raise her daughter, and her daughter had recently graduated from college, and she just couldn't thank Bernie enough. So whether it's Dorothy Day or Bernie Glassman, Charles helped early on at the bakery, cleaning bakery racks and whatnot as they got set up. So that hands-on work in the world is really important. And as a nurse, I always felt that too. It takes head, heart, and hands to do this work. And so again, we need all the help we can get.
This is also Mark. And
Hi, Mark.
Hi. I was just going to mention a few things. I find in the Christian contemplative tradition, mystical tradition, you have currently people like Richard Rohr, Matthew Fox, who very much are steeped in the Christian tradition, but very much are interspiritual.
Yes.
I really enjoy they have daily meditations, both of them, and they're often borrowing from other traditions in their meditations. And Richard Rohr's place is called the Center for Action, Contemplation and Action, which is just what you've been saying, that the two have to go together. Yes, we engage Buddhism, and contemplative action is to not just, have an inner world, but to have an outer world that is one of meeting and trying to alleviate the suffering of all sentient beings.
Yes, and you bring this an important point up. There's a long tradition of contemplative prayer in Christianity, and of course meditation in Zen. And some people are basically Christian and doing Christian forms of prayer, but they just share some stories and some ideas from other traditions. And then there are other people who are actually practicing in two traditions, like my teacher, Roshi Robert Kennedy, and myself, and Reuben Hobbytoe down in Dallas, and many others around the country who are actually engaged in contemplative practice in more than one tradition. And then when we come out to work to engage in practice in the world, we're just human beings helping other human beings and other beings.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say is one of the authors that helped me the most about interspiritual was Joseph Campbell. And is right. He first studied the American Indian, but then went deeply into all spiritual traditions. And he was such a great communicator. I really, that started my interspiritual journey.
Yes, there are profound truths, profound human truths in all the different myths and stories of the world. So although in Zen we kind of emphasize the wordless, the stories are important as well. And we have our wonderful Zen stories from back in ancient China and so around the world. But all of these stories are rich and important for humanity. We don't want to lose any of them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And the languages are important because different languages express human experiences that other languages can't express or don't express. I suppose they could. So we don't want to lose the languages and the stories of the cultures from around the world.
I want to thank you, Ellen, very much, because I have a hula tradition as well. And I really appreciated what you said about depth is of the essence and how it's so difficult actually just to be in one tradition. And I also appreciated your work with, or your experiences with the Native Americans that you shared. So I felt so enriched by your talk today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, June. I've watched many, many, many of your videos. I love Hawaii. I only got to go there once, and I really appreciate the work that goes into preserving indigenous cultures, the language and the dance and the stories, because we don't want to lose any of them. So I appreciate your work as a hula master as well as a Zen master.
Thank you, Ellen.
Tatiana, did you have a question? Oh, okay. So Ellen, thank you so much for that wonderful and rich talk. It was really wonderful to hear you and to hear you sharing the Dharma from your perspective. And all the best to you and Charles and your Sangha.
Thank you.
Difficult time, and give my best to Father Kennedy when you see him.
I will. I might just say that we meet every morning with Roshi Kennedy's Sangha, and he has folks from Ecuador, Ireland, England, all across America each day on Zoom. And our group here in Blacksburg is quite small. We're off in the mountains, but some of our students from Virginia Tech that have graduated and moved back to India or Nairobi or wherever have been able to join us thanks to Zoom. So they're the worst of times and the best of times.
Well, thanks to Zoom, we're able to hear you this morning. So
yes, this is fun. Thank you for inviting me, and I enjoyed meeting everybody. And thank you to Robert, and thank you to Michael and Vanessa, because I've been enjoying as an ex neonatal intensive care nurse, I've been getting great joy watching David grow and blossom into a at-home baby. And I see him there. I see his little head right there.
Yes, this is our combination of Zen and Christianity right here.
Ah, great. Well, David is a wonderful name. David, the beloved of God.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was actually going to say I really appreciated this because, I mean, literally, we do have the combination of Zen Buddhism and Christianity in our own family, in our own household. And yeah, I think that it's great that we're seeing more and more acceptance and just like interest and curiosity about interspirituality. I feel like this is very valuable, and especially as
man, what are you doing up there? What the fuck are you doing, man? You fucking asshole.
Raising a family in that
You
way. It's this is very pertinent and beautiful. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Vanessa, and give David a hug for me.
Yes, will do.
okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you. I love seeing white plums growing out there in Chicago.
Okay, everyone stay safe.
Okay.
Please vote if you haven't already. Please vote. Okay.
Thank you.